Okay, so William Friedkin's The Exorcist. Now, possibly the most iconic of horror movies.
I think it really is the kind of the king. It's. I mean, I think we both. I mean, and I grew up in the VHS era, and this was the kind of the mythical one because it was banned effectively. You couldn't watch it legally until the late 90s. And it just had this mystique about it, this aura, and it is you think about the video nasty era in the 80s and all those films that were banned under the Video Recordings Act. Your Evil Dead, your Texas Chainsaw Massacres, what's it called, Cannibal Holocaust, and I Spit on Your Grave, and Last House on the Left, all those sorts of things. But there's still somehow, I think, even to this day, still is at the very, very top. There's just something about it. It kind of, it just built up such a reputation over those 25 years that it was banned, that it became this kind of Everest that you had to eventually conquer. And I remember seeing it for the very first time when it was released in cinemas in not originally, I wasn't even born, but in 1998. I saw it over at the Brighton Marina, and I'll talk about it later, the reactions. But yeah, I remember going in and just having this real kind of knot in my stomach, that almost like you're taking part in something forbidden. It's I think it's still at the very, very top.
And that's the thing. As soon as you've banned something, it then does create this mystique and this mythology around it.
Yeah.
And I think it was really interesting listening to, I think, the head of the BFI discussing why it was banned. And obviously you mentioned the video nasties, which typically were banned because they were just, a little bit too far in terms of the gore, in terms of the, the general vision you saw on screen. Whereas I think he was saying that the reason this was banned is because of the power that it had, because of the themes of it. It really can make you question your faith and, the power of, I think he was saying, how would you want this film getting into the hands of children watching it on their, their video combis? Would you want that? And it's like, that's a very good point to make. And he said it doesn't mean it's not a great film, because it is a great film. And I think that's obviously helped it a lot with its success, because I think it becomes this thing where it's a water cooler moment. Oh, have you seen The Exorcist? Suddenly it's not just a film you go and see and then immediately forget. Suddenly you want to go in on Monday morning, talk to your work colleagues about it and say, have you seen that? Oh my God, that was, the craziest thing I saw, or whatever it may be. And obviously being based on William Blatty?
Yeah.
William Peter Blatty, sorry, his book of the same name, which it's interesting because in preparation for this episode, I went back and read the book.
Yeah, me too, yeah.
And for, I'd say, the first sort of 2/3 of the book, I was thinking, I remember the film being a lot quicker to get to the point of the exorcism. That's obviously why everybody buys the ticket, essentially. And going, 2/3 of the book, you don't even see Father Merrin. He's not really in it other than, the brief prologue. And then he's not really in it until the exorcism. And I realised the reason why has actually got nothing to do with the film, The Exorcist. It's because of Scary Movie. Because at the start, I think of Scary Movie 2, it starts with the exorcism, and of course, and then I went, oh yeah, of course, it's not even James Woods as as Father Merrin, is it? So I think it was really interesting going back and reading the book, and then.
Yeah, I mean, because I was I obviously rewatched it and reread the book this week, and I just flicked up the display as I was watching the film. I was like, oh, it's got half an hour left, and it hasn't actually got to the meat and bones of the actual exorcism, because all of the stuff during the exorcism is arguably the most famous stuff and the most controversial. Well, no, that's not true, to be honest, but because that is just so relentless, that sequence. It kind of almost becomes the most memorable thing. But yeah, it is surprising. Father Merrin is in it for quite a while, and made me kind of, when I watched it this time, I imagine. I mean, you think about The Exorcist, and you got the poster with Merrin standing in that shaft of light coming from the house. Incredible, iconic poster. But I watched it this time thinking, well, maybe the Exorcist of the title is actually Father Karras, who I think is by far the most interesting character, a fascinating character, and a brilliant performance from Jason Miller.
I would agree with that.
So I watched it through that sort of lens, and frankly, I think if it wasn't for the even with the prologue, I think you kind of forget all about Father Merrin. It's an interesting strategy that is set up as this duel between the two of them, between Merrin and the demon from the very, very beginning. I wonder if the distance of time between seeing him at the beginning and at the end just maybe kind of dulls the impact of that duel. Because I think by then you were far more invested in Father Karras. It has nothing to do with Max von Sydow and his performance. It's really, really good performance. And maybe at the time, especially because of his association with Ingmar Bergman and everything, you imagine him being, I don't know if he's literally top of the cast, but it's like Marlon Brando being top of the cast in Superman, even though it's in it for like 8 minutes or something stupid.
He's the one you sell the movie on, isn't he?
Exactly. So I wonder if that would have been a big draw at the time in 1973. I can't even remember what you asked me, or if you asked me anything. I've just gone off on my.
No, I think it was just the difference between my memory of the film, of him being in it an awful lot more, then going back and reading the book and realizing he's not in the book a lot, and then obviously he's actually not in the film a lot either.
No,
and I think one of the things that get the criticisms out of the way very, very early on, because there are so few, is I've always found the timeline of this slightly sketchy, because as you say, the main event, the heavyweight bout, is obviously when Father Merrin comes in to deliver the exorcism, against Pazuzu. And I've always taken this to be, set an awful lot earlier than the events that we end up seeing with Regan and Chris and Father Karras.
Yeah.
And in the film, it's that's not quite clear. It feels like this is happening, or this has only just happened. And yet when we get Father Merrin, it's this case of, he's done this before, he's getting old now. And it's always been ever so slightly sketchy. And I think that's one thing in the book it is slightly better at, probably because it's just a very different medium. And one thing actually that I would say, one of the more positive things of some of the prequels is it explores that a little bit more in depth. And the positives are quite few and far between with the sequels and the prequels. So that would be my only thing, is I've always taken this to be, if we're saying that that the events are in present day in 73, this is late 40s, early 50s perhaps. And obviously I think it's a bit skew-if, because he looks essentially virtually the same.
Yeah, and the way he takes his pills earlier is like he's on the verge of death, sort of thing.
So it's always been a bit of a point of going, well, when is this?
Yeah.
But as I say, that's probably one of the only criticisms of this film. It's one of those films where I think, obviously, everybody does remember those bits towards the end of the film when we get to the exorcism. Everybody remembers those bits, the head spinning around 360, the green bile, all of those things. And it becomes this thing of, that's what people remember the film as. But actually, when you sit down and watch it, you realise that's just the backdrop for everything. Actually, this is a film about faith. It's a film about, love, and it's not just cheap thrills.
Oh, there's so much more to it than that. Absolutely, yeah. And I think that's another thing. I mean, that made it so controversial. I think so you got the film itself. It does have a mainstream pedigree, and also a kind of art house pedigree, because William Friedkin by this point was talk of the town and toast of the town because of the French connection. You got a reasonably established and respected star in Ellen Burstyn and this art house kind of power of Max von Sydow. And Jason Miller was more famous perhaps as a playwright, a Pulitzer Prize winning playwright. And, William Peter Blatty had an entirely separate career as a comedy writer and screenwriter for things like A Shot in the Dark and stuff like that. So these kind of screwball comedy things. He was very successful at that and then just challenged himself to do this. So it had a kind of mainstream box office pedigree, if you can talk about pedigree and box office in that terms, because this is just at the point, that kind of sweet spot between the establishment of the kind of new American cinema in the kind of late 60s with things like The Graduate and Last Picture House and Easy Rider and that sort of stuff. And we were just beginning to knock on the door of the prestige box office. That we'd had The Godfather by this point. Jaws would be a couple of years later, and that's what started the blockbuster era in the 80s. So it's right at that sweet spot. So you've got kind of that mainstream thing. You've got the fact that it won a lot of Oscars, and also you've got the fact that it built up this mystique because of the rumours of kind of faintings and collapses and people puking in the aisles watching this film at a time, of course, when cinema was on the up again. And that was unlike now where, watching a film for the first time, you could easily be sitting in your front room. You had to go and see it at the cinema back in the 70s, obviously. So it's built up this mystique. And I think it has somewhat overshadowed the fact that when you sit down and actually watch it, that's Peter Blatty on the right, little cameo there.
Yeah.
When you sit down and actually watch it, it is a real interrogation of faith at its heart. And that's what I really, really like about it. It brings in really masterful shocks and blockbuster thrills. I don't know. I mean, a horror movie kind of thrills and shocks as well. But underneath it all, really is a much deeper meditation on faith, and that's why I really cling to the Father Karras character whenever I watch it or read it. He is the main artery of the whole thing, really.
Yeah, and that's, going back to the book, that's something which is very different about the book, albeit that what we see on screen is virtually what happens in the book. It's just more the placings of things. So, for example, I think the first third of the book is pretty much all about Chris MacNeil and Regan MacNeil. I think there's mentions of Father Karras, but it's only in passing.
Yeah.
And it's only when you get to the second part of the book where Father Karras becomes, more of a focal figure in the narrative. And I think it's such an astute way of going, all of the things we see with Father Karras happen in the book, but they happen after the events of what we see with Chris MacNeil. And I think that the genius is just putting those two things side by side. So rather than just going all through, the build up of seeing Regan go from sweet little girl to this, possessed creature, rather than just seeing that and then we go to Father Karras, we see it all happen at the same time. And it breaks up the narrative in a way where you're along for the ride, but it doesn't feel like you're just waiting to get to the exorcism.
Yeah.
One of the criticisms of the book is, I was thinking, when are we going to get to the crazy stuff happening? When does that happen?
Yeah.
In the film, it never really feels like that.
No, that's true.
It's always this elephant in the room. It's always a thing in the background where you're going, okay, where, there's this undertone and this current that runs right the way through it.
It's like a constant drip that ends up being a waterfall.
Yeah.
I think. Yeah, it peppers it through. Yeah, the first third of the book is really strange. It's just basically, it's very dialogue heavy and just about these kind of middle classy elite sort of actors and famous people and social kind of climbers of just getting together and chatting, really.
It spends a lot of time, with Chris and her dealings with Burke Dennings and the way that, you know, that she's looking through her scripts and she's questioning whether or not her character would do X, Y, and Z. And so I can see how if you'd watched the film or if you'd heard about the book, you'd start reading and go, actually, this isn't a very particularly interesting book. I'm not here to know about that. One of the things I do like about the book, which I think is perhaps lost in the film, but that's not to the film's criticism, I think it just makes it different, is the book is very much almost a little bit like a detective novel. It's very much
there's more Kinderman, isn't there?
And also there's always this question around whether or not this is a psychological problem or whether or not it is a spiritual problem.
Yeah.
And only sort of towards those latter stages when Father Karras becomes convinced that, yes, this is actually, and even, you know, that happens quite late on in the book.
Yeah.
Probably at the point where the exorcism happens is when he gets convinced. Whereas here, it's all, you kind of know immediately what the situation is. Obviously, you get the bits where the doctors are questioning what's happening, but you never really feel like there is a question about whether or not she's possessed. You know very much. I mean, obviously, the film's called The Exorcist, so it kind of gives you a clue. But
I'm surprised it takes them, even in the film, it takes them as long as they do to. I mean, that's the one thing that maybe kind of sometimes gets me is like, she's clearly possessed. And even if possession wasn't much of a concept back then, maybe, I don't know, but even if it wasn't a mainstream kind of concern, I think we think about it a lot more in today's society because there's been so many films about it. But back then, you know, you could just, I mean, she's got a tongue like a lizard. She's doing horrible things with religious artifacts, and she's turning her head 360 degrees, and, you know, that sort of stuff. Is like, clearly this has nothing to do with her mind. So yeah, that maybe.
And it does have that, I suppose, that slightly, obviously at the point that this came out, it wouldn't have been cliched, but obviously, you know, of all the possession exorcism based films you get after this, it becomes a cliche where you know, well, it's clearly a psychological problem and everybody is, you know, treating the mother or the possessed as though they're crazy. And actually, as you say here, it's very obvious. It's not that, you know, there isn't any kind of question about it. It's a case of she's clearly possessed, especially when you see her at the start of the film and how sweet and lovely she is. And actually the relationship she has with her mother is a very sweet and genuine relationship without it feeling forced. I'll admit I'm a bit weird where if things feel forced with me, i.e. if I'm being told that this is a sweet, loving relationship between mother and daughter, I immediately kind of usually, you know, I take a step back and go, that's just annoying me because you're telling me here. Whereas here it feels very, very genuine.
Yeah.
And that makes all of the stuff that happens later on that little bit more effective. You know, I think it's a difficult one because I suppose my first sort of, you know, exposure to this film has always been, I can remember my mum saying the first time she went to watch it, I think she went up to London to watch it in the cinema, and she was saying that before she went in, there were priests outside, you know, praying for the people going in to watch it, and when they came out, they were still there and they were praying.
Down with this sort of thing.
You know, and that, what we were saying earlier, builds this kind of mythos and going, well, hang on a minute, what is this film like? Why does it, and obviously growing up in the, you know, in the 90s, where by that point, that kind of thing didn't really happen. You know, horror films were, you know, 10 a penny, and that, as I say, that thing just didn't happen. So it really, even in my mind, I didn't watch this for, you know, I'd say probably until my mid to late teens, because I was like, I don't know if I'm ready for this.
Right.
You know, I suppose, I was probably scared to watch it.
So where did you see it the first time?
So I saw it. I got a special edition DVD when I first started being able to afford buying my own DVDs and stuff. It was one of the first films that I got. and I think my mum and dad had gone out to a party or something. My sister was out with friends, and I was like, I'm going to watch this in the comfort of the living room rather than my own room, as if that makes any kind of difference in terms of safety. I'm closer to the front door if I need to run out screaming or something like that. And whilst, don't get me wrong, it wasn't a case of, because of the age that I watched it, I'd probably seen films that were not necessarily scarier, but the things you see were perhaps a little bit more shocking, or I was desensitized to a lot of it.
Yeah.
But the feeling that I had when I watched it was this feeling of unease and this feeling of all of the shocking things that happen are shocking because of the effects you see it has on the characters in the film. It's not necessarily, obviously, I think it still holds up.
Yeah.
This film, as we watched it this week, is over 50 years old, and it could have been made yesterday.
Yeah.
There is nothing about this film where you go, oh, you can see that was made in 73. Nothing about it. The only thing I would say is perhaps the sound, only because films of that era have a distinctive kind of sound. It's not a criticism at all. It just, you can tell usually.
I think the reason it's so effective is its realism. It's just everything from the locations right the way down to the outlandish special effects were as real as they could possibly be. CGI wasn't a thing back then, but you could use optical effects, you could use matte paintings. He didn't do any of it. Friedkin brings the kind of, well, not quite as cinema verite as French Connection was, but just, it's got such this kind of grimy realisticness to it. It all looks absolutely authentic. So when these real and now when I saw it in the cinema, there was a lot of laughing, and I think today's kind of younger audience watching this now are probably used to things like, The Conjuring and, Insidious and all those things that have got all these shocks and all this, and far more gore than this film has. And I think they would probably, now, for example, I watched Alien with my daughter, who then was 13, and she laughed. She laughed through the whole thing. The chest bursts. I was like, "Oh my god! What's going to happen? Is she going to watch a chest burst sequence?" She's just giggling,
it's difficult
and just kind of
take,
having phone withdrawals. Basically, I could sense her kind of like wanting to, get a phone. And a lot of young people will have seen. Whether they mean to or not, they see a lot of clips from films on TikTok and all that sort of stuff, and that's how they inadvertently get into bands and all that sort of thing. I would hope that this film would have the power today that it had for us, but I don't know. I don't know if I don't know. I can imagine the pacing of this film would probably perhaps put a more modern audience off, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, interestingly, I ended up watching The Exorcist Believer straight afterwards, just because I wanted to, watch it. The only things I didn't watch were the Exorcist TV show, but I watched all the films in prep for this episode, and I watched The Exorcist Believer straight afterwards.
Yeah.
And I think people hold The Exorcist Believer as one of the better sequels.
Yeah.
And I would agree with that. However, it is just a totally different film, and it's a totally different style of filmmaking. And I think it's that thing of film, when you do a horror film in 2025, there's almost things you kind of have to do.
Yeah.
It's like an unwritten rule, and I would push against it if I was a filmmaker, but it automatically has to be visually very dark. Yeah. It has to be in the shadows. It has to be, there usually has to be some kind of grand spectacle in terms of special effects. And whilst this has grand spectacle from a practical effects side of things, one of the things that I think always has impressed me about this is how it creates the fear without the use of darkness. A lot of the scarier things that happen in the daytime, in bright light.
Yeah.
And I think that's a powerful thing to do. You know, I think we probably all as kids growing up were a little bit afraid of the dark. Maybe some of us still now.
Yeah.
And so it's very easy to dim the lights, make everything on screen a little bit darker so you can't really see what's going on. And then suddenly it's very, very scary, or it's scarier. But to be able to create that same level of fear when there is, you know, really, really stark brightness on screen is a real testament to the filmmaking.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, going back to sort of modern audiences, I think if they were to sit down and actually watch it rather than in clips, you know, everybody's seen the head spinning moment, everybody's seen the, you know, the warm green pea soup, you know, thing, and the, you know, the crucifix and the use of that. Everybody's seen those bits and probably in some cases parodied in things like Scary Movie or any other horror parody movie that's come along. But if you sit down and watch it within context, I think then Hannah would still laugh, don't get me wrong, because I think some of the things that happen, it feels very modern in the language that's used. And I think obviously the language and the way in which it's used in today is very, very different. So in 73, some of the use of the C word would have been a massive taboo. Obviously in America it's a bit more taboo anyway, but it would have been really, really shocking.
Yeah.
I think when I was reading the book and watching the film, I was going, you know, the ing on the C word, cunting, it feels very something, you know, very Danny Dyer, very something you could hear in, you know, every pub across East London.
Yeah.
And it doesn't feel like something that would be said in 73. So I was trying to put myself in that mindset and go, well, no wonder this had such a reputation, because that wouldn't have been a word that you perhaps would have heard, you know, around, you know, out and about. So it is such a powerful movie. And one of the things that really strikes me every time I watch it is how good the use of sound is.
Yeah.
You know, the contrasts and the juxtapositions between, you know, screeching and animals, you know, howling, and, you know, the sound of the, you know, rats in the basement that aren't really there, all of those things, and then silence is so powerful, and it makes each element even more powerful. That, you know, when it's really loud and it's hustling and it's bustling, that's really powerful because of the silence, and vice versa.
Yeah, you're absolutely right about the daytime stuff. And again, when the disturbances first happen, like where she's kind of being thrashed around on the bed, it's complete daylight. It's not, you know, kind of, and it just looks like it does look objectively quite almost too hilarious to bear. And I remember the laughter in the cinema, and I think some of it might have been nervous laughter, just a bit of a release of the pressure valve, and, you know, and tackling you with it that way. But I still think some of the laughter was genuine, and I think that was more of a kind of a 90s thing, and it wouldn't have been as funny back in the 70s. But it's because it's established such a, like I say, such a grounding of realism. I mean, the bits in the pub and the bits outside in Georgetown, it's all just so completely authentic feeling. And when you see these almost these supernatural things happening in a everyday. Now, I know these are very well off people. This is a house that they're renting because she's a movie star. She's got a staff of servants and that sort of stuff. But, you know, everyday people, let's say, to see it in that context is really, really difficult to deal with, because it means this is something it's not happening on a spaceship. It's not happening in some isolated creepy work environment. It's not happening in a dungeon. It's not happening in a church even. It's happening in your bedroom. It's in your kid's bedroom down the hall. And that brings with it all kinds of subtexts. Kind of, there's hints that this could be something to do with the divorce, the separation. Is this just a metaphor for kids becoming teenagers and turning into Kevins and that sort of stuff? Is this a reaction to kind of, second wave feminism? Is there there's a suspicion that it might have something to do with Burke Dennings? She uses the language that he uses earlier in the film, the kind of horrendous language. So there's loads of little kind of subtext going on.
And, going back to the realism point you made, it's weird because they are obviously the elite of, of the world. As you say, she's renting this wonderfully lovely, well-off house because she's a movie star. But at no point do I ever feel that privilege is... It never feel. Sometimes in films, you kind of get this sense of because they're privileged, that's what is happening to them.
Yeah.
And it never feels like that. As I say, they feel very real. Like, I think that was one of the things that Friedkin was trying to achieve was it feels like it could be somebody next door to you who's living down your street. It's somebody, it's happening in your back garden, in your, in your bedroom. It's not something that is so far removed that you can't really relate to it. Even when we have, the priests, they're not like extreme priests who are absolutely devout. Father Karras has a crisis of faith. He's a psychiatrist. So
I love just seeing the priests in the pub as well.
Yeah, it's
smoking
not something,
and drinking.
Yeah,
with
it's
everyone
not
else.
something which a lot of people perhaps couldn't connect with. They can resonate with elements of every single character.
Yeah.
And I think, as you say, it goes back to that thing of we're able to see ourselves in the positions of the characters in this film, which makes it a bit more scary because we're now seeing this could be happening to us. And I think anytime you take this subject matter of demons and ghosts and the things that could be there but can't be seen, that it does bring up that question of faith and that question of, I'm not particularly religious at all. I'd say I'm probably absolutely not religious, but there are moments in the darkness at certain points where you go, this is a bit eerie. This is a bit, this is a bit scary. And this is one of those films which absolutely creates that feeling. Like, this is a film that even now, I watched it last night, starting to become dark. I was on my own. Hannah was in a show, so I was on my own. And there was an element of like, don't get me wrong, I wasn't scared. I'm 33. But there was an element of going, if anybody knocks on the door right now, I'm like, who's that? What's going on? If there was any weird noises coming from upstairs, what's that? What's going on? And I think it's that thing of it really does make you question your own spirituality and your own faith in this. It's such
I've grown to love this film a lot because I am someone who goes to church. I've kind of, been a Christian basically since the early 2000s, so a good 25 years now. And I love watching this film because it takes it seriously. And I think whether you're of faith or not, atheist, whatever it might be, this is a film that takes the whole thing seriously. And that's what puts this in a different category to a lot of other horror films that are about spirituality or have some kind of villain that has something to do with kind of the devil or something like that. This film was made and a lot more. I mean, this film features real priests. They were willing to be involved because they didn't want another film like Rosemary's Baby, which they felt kind of ridiculed the whole thing. Very good film in its own right, Rosemary's Baby, in a lot of ways, but this treats it as real. There are real forces out there, and when a film is legitimately scary, but also careful and searching and true about issues of faith, that hits me in the sweet spot. So I like films by Scott Derrickson, who's, raised in, quite a horrible kind of Christian way, but has still got faith. So his films like, what's that one with Eric Bana, the cop one?
Oh, yes.
The Devil Inside?
Yes.
No? The Devil Within Us, something like that. Deliver Us from Evil? Something like that.
I know, I can see the cover, I just can't think of the name of the film.
Black Phone and all these things, they've all got an undercurrent of kind of Christianity and spirituality. And, a lot of Christian cinema there's a deliberate, legitimate genre now, but they're for people who already have a faith. And it doesn't really do much for anyone else.
Deliver Us from Evil.
Deliver Us from Evil. Got there in the end. And I've never seen there are Christian movie studios out there even and production companies. None of them do horror, which I find really ironic because we have the horror genre, in a lot of ways because of what stemmed from the Bible, and which is the ultimate kind of good versus evil story. So I find it a little bit hypocritical. I think the first people in line for a film like The Exorcist or anything that has got something to say about faith, no matter, should be Christians because kind of start the whole thing off. So yeah, there was a lot of reaction to this film, like, kind of evangelicals like Billy Graham and people like that. You must not see this film. This is a work of evil. Evil's defeated in this film. Real priests are in this film. There are real issues here. Yes, there are horrendous things in it, but there's nothing in this film that's more horrendous than some of the things I've read in the Bible.
Yeah, and I think it's a real testament that it is treated so seriously and with brevity, because time and time again we've seen films where the religious ones are kind of treated like the laughing stock and the joke of, well, of course he's going to say this is an exorcism or this is a possessed person because they're religious.
Yeah.
As if that's the first thought immediately. And, the biggest key in the way it tells its story is the fact that Father Karras, when he comes into the situation, he's immediately quite dismissive of her being possessed, and he's like, well, it's not quite as simple as that. It's not just and he's the one he's the one having to be convinced. And not a lot of I certainly can't think off the top of my head of other films that kind of do that. Usually it's the religious ones or the ones who believe are the ones who are usually treated as if they're crazy or if they're extreme in their views or whatever it may be. And everybody, it all goes back to what we were saying about realism. Everybody here is a real character. There will be priests who go down the pub and have a beer who at points will probably have crisis of faith and will question things. There will be, people who don't believe in God or in faith or anything like that, who then have a crisis where they start believing in stuff because they can't explain it. That, every character in this is very, very real. And I think, as you say, some of that goes back to the fact they had real priests in here. So there was this kind of there was this onus on them to, I can't be doing this because that does go against my faith. This does, having that theme throughout where it is treated with respect.
Yeah.
Even, we're watching the scene now between Father Karras and Father Dyer, and, they're smoking and there's a bottle of Chivas Regal on the floor. It's, everybody can probably relate to that moment.
Oh, those dark night of the soul moments. Yeah. And absolutely.
And for anybody who's listening, Father Dyer is the real priest.
Yeah.
He is a real priest.
Well, I think the other one he was in the pub with earlier.
Yes.
Yeah, he is as well. Yeah.
And it's funny because Father Dyer, whenever I watch him, I always get a sense, and he always feels like a Bryan Cranston. he's a really good actor.
Yeah, he certainly is.
It's not like sometimes you see films. I think the one I think of most recently is the Clint Eastwood film about the hijacking of the train.
Oh,
and they use
that was an interesting choice.
And I haven't seen it, but the trailers I've seen, the acting does look a bit strange and a bit weird, and it doesn't quite sit right because they're not actors. No. They're real people who experience those things.
Yeah.
And it could have been that by using real priests. It could have been these people aren't actors, but they're in there because they can bring, a sense of realism to the role, but the acting is a bit poor.
John Spencer,
yes.
Spencer.
Iconic voice.
Yeah.
I hear his voice. I know who it is. Also in The Negotiator as well.
Yeah.
Great film. Yeah. It could have been a moment where you go, why have they cast this person? And then you find out, it's because they're a priest, so of course they've cast that person. But actually, there is some questionable directing traits about the towards the latter stages when Father Dyer is, giving him confession, and apparently they've done 14, 15 takes, and it just wasn't right in Friedkin's mind. And he asked him, "Do you trust me?" And he said, "Well, of course I trust you." And then he slapped him.
Yeah.
And then they filmed the scene. There's some questionable directing techniques used quite consistently throughout this film.
Yeah.
And I've always found that William Friedkin is a guy that I wouldn't want to get on the bad side of.
No. He would fire off guns and shot. He had guns all around the set, presumably with blanks, but he would fire them off to make everyone jump and keep them agitated, piss them off.
Yeah, which is certainly a left field technique.
Yeah.
It's not something that I think you could get away with today.
No.
Obviously, there was things with Regan where Linda Blair, who played Regan, the contraption and the device they used to do that bed scene where she's thrashing about.
Yeah.
That was, I'm not saying it wasn't well made, but obviously during the filming of it, I think, she came away from it in terms of this being strapped in, and it actually injured her back a little bit. There's this, one of the scenes where Ellen Burstyn is being...
Oh, she gets smacked, doesn't she? She gets...
And she gets, I think the way they done it is they had this harness around her which was being pulled by one of the crew off camera. And she was like, you need to be careful because I'm going to hurt myself.
Yeah.
And William Friedkin's like, oh, okay, yep, go easy on her. And then Ellen Burstyn said, I felt a look. And apparently said, really give it to her this time.
Yeah.
And she injured herself.
Well, you can see it. They kept the shot in as well. You can see the pain that she's in.
Yeah, and that's obviously the reason why it looks so convincing is because it's not really acting. It is, it is somebody in intense pain.
This stuff in the hospital with Regan getting all these checks and tests, just so kind of slightly shaky camera gets obscured here and there by random bits and pieces and shoulders and hair, and it's just... It looks like it could be something from, some TV medical fly on the wall documentary. And it just... And the music is carefully used and not used in this film as well. Any other film or any other filmmaker would be underscoring this with music and kind of portentous a soundscape and everything like that, but there's none of it.
Yeah, especially with a piece of music as iconic as Tubular Bells by Mike Oldfield. That
not quite as often, not as overused in the film as I remembered. Actually,
no,
it's literally only for about 20 seconds.
I think it's used twice.
Yeah,
and in 2025, and certainly in The Exorcist Believer, it's albeit it's not in its original form. It's a new interpretation of it. It's used quite a bit.
Yeah,
and I don't begrudge it for that because it is a great piece of music, and it is surprising that that music isn't used more. Obviously, it wasn't written for the film.
No,
it wasn't written for The Exorcist.
I think it was used just before it went kind of thermonuclear as well. I think it was just kind of like looking for anything to use, and I think it was used. It may have been used even before it was released, or before Tubular Bells was huge in America, maybe.
Yeah,
so,
I think you're right. Because originally Friedkin had, they hired a symphony orchestra, and they apparently showed the first showing of it, and Friedkin fired them on the spot and said that's just not going to work.
No.
So
I was keeping in my mind that there's a shot earlier when Karras is talking to the other priest in the bar earlier, and it's just a very, for all intents and purposes, a very standard scene. Again, the kind of color and kind of aesthetic of it is really dark and smoky and kind of sepia and really kind of realistic. Really, really love it. And they're just talking, and he just says, "Father, I think I've lost my faith." And there's a real sudden smash cut from that line of dialogue to the exterior of the McNeil household and this ominous gust of wind.
Yes.
And it just made it feel like that comment is directly linked to what's going to end up being crucial in that house later. I really like that edit choice, because you're expecting you're expecting that scene to go on for another 30 seconds, but it just cuts away so suddenly. You wouldn't see that much nowadays. It's great.
Yeah, it is a fantastic cut, and I think throughout this, it makes great choices. You mentioned about that hospital scene where she's being examined, and the shaky sort of hand cam feel of it, the obscuring of the medical equipment and how it could look like a medical documentary of that time.
Yeah. Just noticed the Charlie Brown figurine on the side of her bedside table as she's being thrashed around on the bed.
Which is a tiny, tiny thing that just reminds you that she's a child.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Tiny, tiny thing that take that out doesn't make any difference really to the scene. Just a subtle, subconscious thing that reminds you that she's a child. But yeah, going back to that hospital scene, I love the way that immediately makes you feel uncomfortable, as probably most of us would feel in a hospital in that setting. It's those things, especially if you have children and you're watching your child and you feel helpless whilst these things are going on. You could just film that and it could just look great on screen, but it's filmed in a way where it really makes you feel uncomfortable, makes you feel uneasy, makes you feel, and that mirrors a lot of the book's subtext that Chris, which I don't think is really explored in this so much, but Chris really doesn't trust the medical world.
No.
She really doesn't trust them. I think in the book she lost a child because her child was misdiagnosed or diagnosed late. And I think that becomes quite a big part of why she's not necessarily quick to believe she's possessed, but why she's more accepting of it. And why she's less accepting of the doctors and their opinions, which isn't really explored in the film. And again, not to its detriment at all, because I think it's just a different take on it.
I think the performance is kind of when you I mean, obviously the screenplay here is by Blatty. And he's taken some quite extensive dialogue and narrowed it down to the bare essentials in quite a judicious way, really. So he gets the essence of all of it, really. There's other things that, there's a bit more suspicion on Carl, the housekeeper, in the film. There's more in the book, sorry.
Yeah.
There's a bit more of Kinderman. It's very interesting the way Kinderman's used in this, and there's more traditional detective scenes back at the police station, or at least in Kinderman's car, as he starting to deduce and piece things together, and 3 or 4 of those scenes that don't appear in this film. Do you know what? Funnily enough, I find there's one bit in this film which I think is more subtly chilling than anything else, and it's the bit where Kinderman's at the house doing his kind of avuncular act while also, getting some quite pertinent questions and subtle accusations along. And you can feel now in the book, Chris MacNeil is actually quite warms to him, but in this book, in the film, she is just like, this guy's presence in the house is almost as uncomfortable as the presence of whatever is possessing Regan. And there's a bit where they've been talking for a while. The scene goes on for a while, and Chris offers more coffee, and he says, "Please." And I find that really chilling, because a lot of this film is actually about social faux pas and social expectations. You know, when Regan comes down to the dinner party, or the cocktail party earlier, and urinates and says you're going to die up there to the astronaut and that sort of stuff. None of it. Everyone just stands in kind of shock horror, including her mother for a while. Nobody thinks to help this poor girl. Oh, okay. None of that. And Dennings and his accusations to Carl that he's a Nazi and that sort of stuff. There's all these social boundaries that are overstepped in the film, which make it quite kind of uncomfortable. And the look on Chris's face when Kinderman says, "Please, yeah, I'll have another cup of coffee," which incidentally he doesn't end up drinking. I've always found that really, really interesting. It doesn't happen in the book. And the look on her face is like, "You're gonna have another coffee? Why?"
Yeah,
you got to go.
I think it's that realization.
Yeah, that is.
I don't think it's about Kinderman so much. I think it's the realization that this problem isn't going away.
Okay,
that's how I've always interpreted.
Yeah,
well, I do. I think Father Karras is perhaps my favourite character and the strongest character in the film. However, I have a real soft spot for Kinderman.
Yeah.
I think his Columbo detective-esque feel is it's such a contrast to everything we see in this film, where it is heavy. It's a very heavy film, and he comes in and constantly asking about, "Oh, do you like the movies?" It's like you're investigating a potential murder and you're asking about somebody, do they go to the movies? Or he asks Chris for her autograph and he's like, "Oh, it's for my daughter," and he's like, "Oh no, actually it's for me."
Yeah.
I'm a big fan.
So I just find all that stuff really, because I've got a very high cringe factor. My wife will tell you. I mean, things like pranks and do you ever watch Ant and Dec's Saturday Night Takeaway?
I have on occasion.
The bit where I'm a celebrity, get out of my ear. And they're backstage telling them what to say. I can't bear it. I'm telling you, and this is not a word of lie, I will be like this, scrunched up on the sofa with a pillow over this ear and a cushion over this ear. Unbearable. I can't, like somebody else who can't bear to watch a horror film. Secondhand embarrassment. It's called Fremschaumen. It's an actual thing where you just can't bear seeing other people embarrassed. I don't mind being embarrassed. I don't mind embarrassing other people, but I can't watch on TV.
Yeah, I think admittedly, probably a lot of people are sitting there watching Ant and Dec like that, but for perhaps many different reasons.
I think that was unfair. I think that was actually really good, you've got to say.
I like Ant and Dec, but I know there are people who really don't.
But that's why I find that Kinderman scene really uncomfortable.
Don't get me wrong, it is uncomfortable. Yeah. But when he's interviewing, because it is an interview, Father Karras, there is that warmth to him.
Yes, there is.
I can see why he's very good at his job, because he immediately kind of makes you feel your guard's down a little bit, because you just think, this guy isn't going to be questioning me. He doesn't think I'm a murderer.
And Karras knows how to handle him a bit more. He knows what's bullshit and what isn't, and what's pushing the line and what isn't, and he gives him a sly grin every now and again. But Chris just isn't in a position to be able to do that.
Yeah, and Kinderman's relationship with Father Karras is actually a point of conflict between William Peter Blatty and Friedkin as to the end of the movie, because
that's right.
The end that I would suggest most people have seen, and the original theatrical ending is, Father Karras dies, and then we see the new equilibrium. We see Regan and her mother, and they're moving away, and then Father Dyer comes along and says, just wanted to, say so long and everything.
Yeah.
And then there's this really sort of poignant walk off into the distance as he's just lost his friend.
Yeah.
And then the movie ends. And actually what William Peter Blatty wanted was essentially almost a revision of the scenes that Father Karras and Kinderman had, where Kinderman would come along and start speaking to Father Dyer.
That's right, yeah.
That, I think in William Peter Blatty's mind, it was, we see that relationship between Father Karras and Kinderman is almost reborn through Father Dyer.
Yes,
and it's a much more hopeful ending.
Yep.
And to be honest, it's weird because usually I sit firmly on one side or the other. Like usually I'm much more, I prefer a pessimistic ending to a happy ending. But I like both in equal merit. It's really, really strange where I feel like I should make a decision as to which one I prefer.
Yeah.
And I like both. I like the poignancy of seeing Father Dyer walk off into the, not quite off into the sunset, but walk off into this new world.
Yeah.
But I like the warmth of, this budding relationship between Kinderman and Father Dyer. I like that.
Yeah. I like that in both scenarios. It kind of ends with Father Dyer. Like I like the more abrupt ending of the theatrical cut because it's almost like saying this isn't over, basically. I'm not saying it was a setup for a sequel, not in the slightest, but it's like this, these spiritual matters, these crises, these battles, these spiritual battles, it doesn't end here. This isn't an episode that's going to be brushed off by anyone involved. But yeah, the ending with Dyer and Kinderman just brings a smile to the face, a warm smile. And it's nice to know that in some way the spirit of Karras lives on in that way through their relationship. And this symbiosis of skepticism and reason with faith and spirituality represented in Dyer in Kinderman and Dyer respectively, carries on, in some kind of, mutually respectful kind of harmony.
Yeah, and I think the beauty of both endings is that they're open to interpretation. You can interpret them in many different ways. I think the best endings are like that, where it's not definitive, it's not one thing or the other, it's what does this mean? And it leaves you with a question, or it leaves you wanting a little bit more, but not necessarily getting a bit more, which kind of, you mentioned the sequel. Where do you stand on the sequel?
Well, The Heretic.
The Heretic.
Oh, God. It was god-awful on an objective level. It was horrible. I didn't like it at all. To be quite honest, I'd seen it once in my life, and that was a long time ago. I remember a lot of Linda Blair's face and lots of back projection.
Yes,
and metaphysical stuff which did not land. And I thought it was a mess from what I remember. I was not inclined to return, so that probably says something. Maybe I need to see it again. But
it is a weird film. Obviously, it has Richard Burton coming in, and it has James L. Jones, so it's a star-studded cast.
Yeah,
it's not okay. I don't think it's. Now, let me phrase this in a way where pitchforks are not thrust in my direction. When we first started the podcast, one of the things that I'd always heard about with The Exorcist was how the sequel and how bad it was. And I ended up just going, well, I'm going to watch this sequel then. Let's see how bad it was, how bad it is. And I'm not saying it's good, but I don't quite... I understand why the hate is there, because it comes after this. When it, anything that comes after this is going to be bad because it's not this, isn't it? I didn't think it was absolutely terrible. I'm not saying it's good, but it was somewhat watchable. I think it's a very, very different film.
Yeah.
It deals with some similar themes. It just does them in a less... I didn't really see it as a horror. I think it was more of a spiritual movie. And I think there are elements that are not quite positive, but not all bad.
Okay. I'll gladly watch it again.
I think a lot of people do think that the third film
That's where it's at.
which is which feels much more connected.
Yeah.
It's very weird. I think the thing that the second one kind of forgets is it's part of the Exorcist universe. Kind of forgets that.
Yeah.
It just seems to be a film about faith rather than it being connected. If not being funny, if you take Linda Blair out of it becomes I think it's almost, you call it anything else, it's I'm not going to say it's going to be a successful movie, but I don't think it would get the hate it has, because it's part of the Exorcist. It's gonna, the third film I think is a much better addition. It goes back to that kind of origin of the book, which is far more detective novel like. It has those same things of somebody trying to find out what's going on. Have you seen the prequels?
Yes, both of them. I think I was more interested. Well, no, I think I wanted to be interested. I remember Rennie Harlin's one, and
which is
fine.
The Exorcist at the beginning.
Yeah, I remember wanting and expecting to really like the Paul Schrader one, because again, he's a kind of a lapsed Catholic, and there's this undercurrent of religion and faith in a lot of his screenplays and films. First Reformed, for example, which is a fantastic movie with Ethan Hawke, which is about a priest.
Yeah, that isn't one
which came a lot after.
I need to see that. Yeah.
But I remember being disappointed. The themes were what I was interested in, the religious themes. But I think it was such a compromised film that he couldn't get across what it was.
It's very weird, because they're basically, The Exorcist, the beginning, and Dominion, prequel to The Exorcist, are essentially the same film. They tell the same story.
Yeah.
It's just, and it's weird because they came like a year apart from each other. It's a very, very, and they obviously both have Stellan Skarsgård playing Father Merrin, which I think is a great bit of casting, actually.
Yeah, that's true.
He is one of the shining lights in those films. It's very, very strange that you had two films that are essentially, I think I got really confused watching them back, because I thought I put the wrong disc in, because I was like, oh, hang on a minute, this is the same film, and then was like, oh no, it's not the same film. It's just that it tells the same story, albeit bits and pieces are removed.
It's a fascinating kind of backstory,
and I don't really know why so quickly after each other the same film essentially was made. It's very, very odd. And then obviously we get The Exorcist the Believer, which I think was, I suppose, a homage more than anything. I think it done that thing of, it probably would have been a decent film if they hadn't called it The Exorcist.
That's right.
I think they done a little bit of the the crowd pleasing. Obviously, it had Ellen Burstyn back in reprising her role as Chris McNeil, and then later on Linda Blair with an Avengers style, not quite after credits scene, but cameo. It's almost like I'd have preferred Linda Blair not to have been in it, because it feels very much like, hey, you know what we're doing? Hey, wink, wink, nudge, nudge at the camera.
Who left the crucifix under there? Was it Dennings? Jennings.
I think it was Burke Dennings. Yeah. I think so. But
I can't remember if that was ever gotten to the bottom of.
But it's a difficult one, because I can see why those sequels and those prequels were made, because this film was so successful. It was made on a $12 million budget, which in 1973 was a big figure. It made back just under $2 million on its opening weekend. Domestically, it made back $193 million. And worldwide, it made $441 million, which, if you were to convert that into today's money, domestically, just over 1.3 billion.
Really?
And
Jeez.
Worldwide, 3 billion. So
you can't imagine anyone.
I did use ChatGPT for those conversions,
right,
so if they're wrong, I do apologise. But so, that very much shows you how successful this movie was. And I think, going back to what we were saying about it being banned and not being on home video, and the general aura that was created with, the response the Catholic Church had to this, meant that it was going to be more successful. I think it's almost a thing of going, if you don't want the film to be successful, just don't mention it.
Well, it's the saying, they always do that. That's what happened with Life of Brian. That's what happened with Last Temptation of Christ. Yeah, if they hadn't said anything, it might not have been the big deal.
So looking at the crew, so obviously we mentioned William Friedkin directed the film, who most people probably know from The French Connection, Sorcerer, To Live and Die in LA. William Peter Blatty was the screenwriter, who is the author of the novel as well, and he also written things like The Ninth Configuration, Legion, which is the sequel to The Exorcist, A Shot in the Dark. The cinematography was Owen Roizman, also worked on The French Connection, Network, Tootsie. Norman Gay was the editor, along with Bud Smith. They'd worked on things like The Brink's Job, The Boys from Brazil, Flashdance, Crimson Tide. Jack Nietzsche was the music supervisor, probably most well known for One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Marcel Velcator was special effects, and Dick Smith was makeup effects. And going back to what I was saying about this film being nearly just over 50 years old and it not feeling 50 years old, usually when I watch a film from the early 70s that is using practical effects, you can see the practical effects, you can see it all there. You can see the fact that the makeup looks very rubbery. It's not particularly well made, but here everything holds up to the point where it's almost impossible to see. Almost impossible to see the scenes. The fact that the head spinning moment that is so iconic. The fact that that's a dummy. Obviously, when I watched it, I didn't expect it to be actually the actress doing that herself.
No.
But when I found out it was a dummy, I was really shocked, because I was like, how did I not notice that? And even now that I know, watching it back, I do not see there being a dummy. It's so well made. It's so, even things like The Terminator, which is one of my favorite films. The dummy they use in that looks like it was made in the 60s, let alone the 80s. It's aged quite badly, but here it's so well done, and it's so, I can't see any of the cracks. And
it's papered over. Well, not papered over, but it's kind of hidden by just such simple yet effective editing as well. As that head turns, you can see, they've cut away and they've returned to hide the joins, and it's created iconic cinema. Yeah.
It does have perhaps the most iconic, certainly the most iconic horror movie poster. I would argue the most iconic movie poster.
It's a great poster.
I think, I can't remember the name of the piece, but it was somewhat influenced by a piece of art which has that same...
Oh, yeah, the Matisse.
Yes, that was it. Has that same kind of gush of light.
Yeah.
And it has, it feels very similar. But, for years and years and years, I'd seen that cover, and immediately there's like a cold breath of air runs down the back of my spine. It always, and for years, having not seen it and hearing stories about my mum and priests being outside in the cinema, I think even my nan was saying it. My nan was always one who would watch horror films late at night, to the point where when we used to stay over there,
I can't even watch it. When we asked him for the autograph, I just can't watch it. It's so embarrassing.
Yeah, when we used to stay over there, we would sometimes be allowed at a very young age to stay up and watch these horror movies.
Nice.
Famously, my sister was exposed to Jacob's Ladder at the age of 10. Yeah. We were watching The Sopranos in our very early years, because it was just on, and my nan would just put it on and we'll be all right, that sort of thing. But I can remember there being a time when The Exorcist was on, hear a conversation between my granddad and my nan, and my granddad going, might want to turn it over in a minute, they've got The Exorcist on. Bearing in mind, I knew my nan to like horror films, even she went, oh yeah, and turned it over. And it was like, immediately going, well, how scary must this film be if my nan, who always watches horror movies, is turning it over. I know we're here, but usually that wouldn't be a thing, you know, and that it just creates this mythos and this whole, you know, this whole feeling prior to watching it. So when I eventually watched it, it was just a constant feeling of dread.
Yeah.
You know? And it's as much as what doesn't happen and what you don't see as what you do see. You know, obviously we see crazy things happening, we see terrible things happening, but it's all those things that we don't see as well. You know, like this is obviously it's also the thing of how long and how prolonged these episodes are. Like, obviously they have big bursts of, you know, these climaxes, but then there's also these long periods of time where nothing's really happening.
Yeah.
And because of that, it's almost this thing of like, well, when's it going to start up again? When's it going to happen again? You know? And Linda Blair is so iconic in this role. So iconic.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's a reason why Scary Movie parodied it, because it's so good. And
it made me laugh because I rewatched that bit, and the bit where James Woods as the Merrin character turns up, takes one look at this demon possessed girl tied to the bed, and he goes, "Fuck this," and leaves. It's like, that's exactly the response that everyone who saw this child in the film should have had. And it's like, this is clearly supernatural. But yeah. And did you ever see Repossessed?
No. Who's in that?
Oh, that's the Exorcist equivalent of the Naked Gun. So with Leslie Nielsen, the front cover is him surfing, like, you know, the front of a Naked Gun is him on a bullet, holding a gun. This time it's him on a crucifix holding a Bible.
I need to go and watch that.
Shit, man, I am stunned that you weren't aware of it, man. You've got to see it. It's hilarious.
Because I love the Naked Guns. Obviously, we've done an episode on it recently. So listen to that episode if you haven't already.
I looked to see, just had a cheeky look to see if the whole thing was on YouTube, but it isn't. It's quite rare and difficult to get nowadays.
I think that's probably why I haven't seen it, because it's one of those ones that isn't.
Oh, but damn, in the 80s, I watched that non-stop. And Linda Blair is in it. And fully, she's in the whole thing, and she fully sends up the whole lot.
Amazing.
It's really good.
Try and find a copy of that.
Yeah, I'm intrigued now.
And I think the reason why, obviously I haven't seen Repossessed, but the reason why things like that and Scary Movie are so funny is because of how scary what it's basing it is on. You know, I would say that as much as I love the first Scary Movie, because I think it's Scary Movie 2 that they...
It is, yeah. It's the best thing in Scary Movie 2 by a mile.
Yeah, I would say that is probably my favourite Scary Movie bit.
Yeah.
Even though I think the first film is obviously the best one, and as a whole much, much better. But the best bit is that bit, because it's so on the nose and on point with what everybody's thinking. As you say, you know, James Woods, I think, is great in that anyway. But when he's like, "Fuck this," it is that feeling of like, you would be doing that.
Yeah.
Obviously, you know, particularly if you don't have any faith, but it's even that thing of going, well, there must be a point where the priests must be thinking that.
Yes. Yeah.
There must be a point where Father Merrin, it's not, you know, it's the quiet thing that you don't say out loud, but he must be thinking, for fuck's sake, why am I here again?
Yeah.
Why am I fighting Pazuzu again?
Let me show you. There it is.
Oh, I see that.
And look who else is in it. Mean Gene Okerlund.
Mean Gene and Jesse Ventura. I mean, okay, that is...
it's actually not too bad. You can find some imports for like 12, 15 quid. But,
not too bad. I will be picking that up. As I say, it's got Jesse Ventura. You've convinced me even more.
If you do pick it up, or if either one of us picks it up, we've got to watch it together, man. I would want to see you see it for the first time.
Absolutely. I think it's... With The Exorcist, I think it has such an iconic, you think of horror movies, usually the ones that everybody has seen is The Exorcist. You know, you were saying earlier about that mainstream appeal. Not everybody's into horror movies, but I guarantee you that the people who aren't into horror movies have probably seen The Exorcist.
Well, I generally think is still a film that, well, I don't know, that people still maybe if there's one film that they aren't inclined to touch, it would be this. Even though a lot of people say, I think it is still. I mean, I know my wife won't go near it. I mean, I would never get her to see it, but she finds it tricky to watch any horror film. I mean, we went to watch Weapons the other night, and that was fantastic. But she finds it tricky to watch anything that's got a supernatural undercurrent to it or that sort of thing. But yeah, I'd still think, and it's the word exorcist as well. There's, you don't think about that word without thinking about this film.
No, yeah. I think that's probably where the vast majority of people would have heard the word for the first time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And, even if people haven't seen it, it's like, it's that thing of when things bleed into popular culture. So if you know nothing about football, you know David Beckham.
Yeah.
If you know nothing about wrestling, you know Hulk Hogan.
Yeah.
If you know nothing about horror movies, you know The Exorcist.
Yes.
At the very least, you've seen Linda Blair in full.
You've
full
heard
makeup.
the rumours, about the screenings, about the famous
you know
scenes.
about it, and I think it's strange because William Blatty was saying that this had all the makings of being an absolute flop because when he obviously he wrote the book and then the screenplay is like, well, you can't, some of the stuff I put in there, you can't show that on screen, can't show that, and then they do. And then, and then it deals with those taboos, obviously there's quite a sexual undertone to a lot of the stuff that's happening, even the things of when she urinates on the floor, don't really see that in movies. You don't see, unless it's toilet humour, you don't really see that. It deals with those taboos. It deals with crisis of faith. It deals with religion. They always say, if you go to a party, don't talk about politics or religion. And this deals with it in abundance, and it deals with the, the parts that people don't talk about. Yeah, even priests wouldn't talk about. I would have thought.
That's right, and it just does it in such an adult way. This is not a film. I don't feel that this is a film that the filmmakers were hoping would skew well with a few young teenagers to make it big or anything like that. It's a proper adult, serious, contentious film.
I think most first and foremost, I don't think they set out to make a horror film. They set out to make a story, and I think that's the thing of there's not cheap thrills in this, but there are those thrills and there are those moments where they push the envelope as pretty much as far as they can.
Yeah.
But it's not, it might be why you buy the ticket, but it's not why you come back to it. The story and the relationships that you have between all of the characters, Father Karras's inner conflict and inner torment, the way his mother's death is shown on screen and dealt with on screen. Sorry, when I say shown on screen, you don't see her die on screen, but the way it's dealt with, probably one of my favourite shots of the film is when you see him come out of the subway, and then across the street he sees his mother.
I was going to say that, I agree with you.
And it's silent.
Yeah.
You can see them. You see him, waving and shouting, but and it's interspersed with a dropping of the St. Christopher.
And again, all on a real New York street, all capturing that time.
Yeah, it feels very, very much Midnight Cowboy-esque.
Yeah.
That same visual style. And in terms of influences, obviously, there's loads, but one of the influences that I really got, which I didn't think I would get actually, was Halloween. There's a couple of shots in here where you see that, one of the reasons Friedkin wanted to shoot it in Georgetown is because of the visual style of it, and it looks very cinematic, he said, but especially in the fall when you see those, the leaves falling off the trees. And then I think there's a point where, obviously, I think it's subtly set around Halloween, because
Yeah.
there are some kids who are dressed up for Halloween and they run past Chris McNeil in the early stages of the film, and then you get those gusts of wind with the leaves.
Yeah,
that
true,
felt
actually.
very, very,
Haddonfield, Illinois.
Exactly. It felt very much like, are we going to see Michael Myers walk around the corner in a sec?
That's true.
It's very, very similar.
Yeah.
And obviously this is 5 years before that film comes out. So those things which, on the face of it, you could see the links in terms of them both being horror movies. But when you actually when you actually sit down and watch them both, they're, chalk and cheese in terms of films. So I was really surprised at how much I got that from there. And it's just there's so much to the film, which seems like such a basic thing to say.
Yeah.
But there are real art house artistic elements to this.
Yeah.
I said earlier about the sound and the contrast it uses. There's some of the shots, I think in that same shot.
I love the zooms as well in this film.
Yes. Yeah.
The bit at the beginning where they're filming the protest and the camera kind of rises up and then locks onto and follows.
Karras.
Yeah. Very, I know it precedes it, but, does it precede? Oh no, I think the conversation, Francis Ford Coppola, was that 4?
Let's have a look.
It was between the two Godfathers, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think
but
that's 70.
There's a lot of that in
74. You are right. I do apologise.
So I love those. Yeah, I love those shots. Just picking people out in a crowd and great.
And perhaps contender for my favourite shot is when they are mid-exorcism and they have a break.
Yeah,
and there's the shot of Father Merrin and Father Karras just sitting on the stairs.
I would have said the same thing. That and the subway stuff. Yeah, I agree.
It's absolutely so. I mean, it's going to sound a bit of a weird analogy to make, but if what we see on screen is food, then that shot is about as nutritious as you can possibly get. It's like a superfood. It's like kale, except it tastes nice. It's such a great shot. It tells you so much. And actually, that scene was far more extended in the original screenplay. There was a conversation that was happening between them.
It's an interesting conversation as well.
Yeah, and it was cut. And actually, one of the things that I think is perhaps most surprising about this movie is usually when they cut stuff, the stuff that's cut is cut because it's not great.
Yeah.
It's not, but actually everything I've seen that was actually cut from the original theatrical release is great.
Yeah.
I mean, perhaps the most famous thing that's cut is the spider walk.
Yeah.
Which is perhaps the only thing that looks a little tiny bit ropey.
Yeah, I've never been a fan, and I don't think it adds anything, to be honest. I mean, we know she can do that sort of stuff, and there are other scenes that say exactly the same thing and give us exactly the same information.
But if you were to leave it in, it's not like it makes the film worse. Whereas I think a lot of the time there are scenes where you go, if they left that in, that would have been terrible.
I think they took it out because it follows so hot on the heels of the revelation that Dennings has been killed.
Yes,
died.
There's in the documentary by Mark Kermode, the Fear of God.
Yeah,
is it in the Fear of God or
the Fear of God? 25 years of the Exorcist.
Yeah,
I think it's called.
There's a point where Blatty and Friedkin sit down and they're discussing it, and you can see there is a real tension between them. Like there's a real kind of like I don't really want to be there, but they're saying, I think Friedkin was saying that the problem with that scene is that it's a second climax.
Yeah.
And, you get the climax of the fact they found out that Dennings has died, and then all of a sudden that happens and it's a second climax.
Yeah.
And it's funny because Blatty is really quite intelligent enough to kind of admit where he went wrong. He went, I think perhaps what I should have done.
Yes.
And what he's saying he should have done is, before you see the reaction of Ellen Bernstein, that's when the spider walk then happens. So it ends up being one climax rather than two. And I think it was a really sort of like commendable thing to admit where he went wrong with it. Because I think sometimes writers, particularly writers who then don't have control of the film that gets made, can be very, very precious of, that's not my film. You know, Stephen King is one of them. You know, I think The Running Man, which was based on one of his books, but he was under a pseudonym.
Richard Bachman.
Yeah. He didn't like the Running Man film that was made.
Oh, they turned that into
The
a
Shining
Schwarzenegger
again is another
adventure. I love the Running Man, but it's very different from the book.
Yeah.
Be interesting to see what Edgar Wright does with it, especially the ending.
Yeah. I'm not totally convinced. I like Glenn Powell and I like Edgar Wright.
I think I like Glenn Powell.
You don't sound that confident. I think he's never really been in anything great.
I think he's been very, very promising. No, well, I think in Top Gun Maverick is the thing that did it.
I've not seen that.
Oh, have you not?
Well,
I think it's I don't know, great movie, an all-timer. I think it's brilliant.
It's been so long since I've seen Top Gun.
Yeah. Oh, you don't need to worry about that. I rewatched Top Gun and I was actually a bit bored. But Top Gun Maverick, well, in the cinema or on a TV like you got, it is fantastic. And no, I'm going to go off on a tangent about him, but never mind.
Yeah,
anyway, I was just saying. Sorry, I was going to say when it was on, but when Karras was doing the Eucharist and the breaking of the bread, the host. Oh man, Jason Miller's face says that I've never seen self-doubt like it. Never. It's the best self-doubt I've ever seen, I think. And
obviously, you mentioned earlier that he's a well-known playwright before this.
And father of Jason Patrick.
Is he really?
Who's my man crush.
He's the father of Jason Patrick?
That is affirmative.
That has literally blown my mind.
Yeah.
I don't know what to say. Jason Patrick is so underrated, I have to add as well.
Oh, yeah, agree.
So underrated.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm still trying to get past that he's Jason Patrick's dad.
Yeah.
Christ, what? Poor choice of words, but what a father to have. So Father Karras, I've never seen him in anything else other than The Exorcist 3.
Yeah, that's true.
And
me neither.
I think that's such a shame because I think he's so good in this.
Yeah.
I want to see him in
Did he get nominated for an Oscar for this? I hope so.
Check. I know it was a
lot
quite
of nominations,
successful.
isn't it? That's the other part when you say, oh, this is clearly needs an exorcist. When words start manifesting on a child's tummy. I mean, what the hell? So, yeah. Well, to be fair, this is the point where he gets him in. So
I couldn't. I mean, a lot of the time you can, when you watch practical effects like that, you can kind of, if you don't know how they're done, you can work it out. And perhaps I'm just being a bit slow on the uptake, but I don't know how that, I have no idea how they've done that. And I kind of don't want to know because I think it ruins the illusion. But as I say, all of those practical effects just hold up so well.
Yeah.
But going back to Jason Miller, I just want to see him in so much more. I mean, looking at his IMDb credits, obviously he's in The Exorcist, he's in The Exorcist 3, he's in Rudy, apparently. That championship season.
That's the play that he wrote that won him a Pulitzer Prize.
Oh, what, that championship season? Was that? Oh, yeah, I see that now.
I think Jason Patrick ended up doing it as a play as well.
He's in the 9th configuration, so I need to go.
Of course, yeah. I've got that home, and I started it, especially because Mark Commode goes on about it, and I kind of, I needed to be in the right frame of mind. But I've got it at home ready to watch.
I do think...
Oh, doesn't this guy look like Jackie Earle Haley?
Yes, he does. Oh, my God.
Identical.
We're going to be careful not to mention that too much, otherwise they will have a remake. And they will do that.
Yeah.
That's my train of thought.
Sorry, man.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Jason Miller.
What you were saying about the 9th configuration and being in the right frame of mind, I think this is one of those films as well. Like, as good as this movie is, I wouldn't say this is a movie you can just stick on.
No.
You have to be in the right frame of mind.
You got to watch this. Yeah, you got to be prepared to have a think.
Yeah, it's heavy and it sits with you. It's one of these films, like after I watched it last night, probably because I knew I had to finish reading the book. It was like it lingers, and not in a way where you're like, this is annoying me that it's lingering on, but in a way where you're questioning stuff, and you know, if you're not religious, it starts making you question, you know, your own faith. If you are religious, it will do the same, but it just sits with you. And there are shots that, as you say, you know, there's the awkwardness of Kinderman and that, you know, please moment. You know, there's the awkwardness of that. There's a lot of things that sit with you, and obviously now we're on screen, we're just getting to that iconic shot, which is so iconic, and to the point where it's become its own thing now, where it's totally separate from the movie, where it is just a piece of great iconography.
Give the cinematographer a day off, you know. That's great.
Absolutely. He will. It must be a real sort of moment in time when you're creating this piece of work, not necessarily knowing how it's going to be received, because there would have been probably a lot of apprehension with this. And
this bit when she screams out Merrin when he arrives, part of me is still in that cinema 25 years later. I jumped, I must have jumped close to the top of the roof, man. I am a very easy jumper. It doesn't take much. I watch most horror films with my fingers in my ears because I jump very easily. Oh man, I'll never forget that. Oh God.
Yeah, and because it comes after that almost stunningly beautiful shot, you ever so slightly subconsciously you're lulled into this sense of security that we're okay from it, and then it's just this as I say, it's just this constant elephant in the room constantly, where if it's not happening, you know it could happen at any moment. You know, if it's not immediately right there in your face, it's in the back of your mind. It's that thing all the time. And you know, going back to what I was saying about the, you know, how iconic that shot is. When they were releasing this, there would have been an apprehension, and they would have been thinking, you know, how is this going to be received? Is it going to be successful? You know, I would have thought we've got something good here, but that doesn't always translate into selling. And the one thing that probably they knew 100%, they said, if this film isn't received particularly well, if it doesn't sell, if it doesn't this, if it doesn't that, the one thing they probably would have known is, when we show that poster, people will love that poster. You know, there are films where sometimes the poster is better than the film. You know, and you look at it and you go, that is a great poster. You watch the film and you're like, oh, that's terrible. You know, here, at the very least, and it must be that thing of going, you know, if you've done nothing else in your career, you've got that in your back pocket.
That's your
you know, that'll be the thing when you're old and grey, and you know, you're talking to the grandkids, and the grandkids are going, oh God, he's telling us one of his yarns again. You can go, did you know that poster that everybody knows? Oh, I done that poster. I was like, yes, Grandad, you've told us every day for the past 17 years. You know, you would, you know, I think all of us who do anything creative are longing for that moment where we create something which has that same reveredness, where we know, you know, that is a quality piece of work, you know. And we are finally on to the Exorcist scene. The exorcism itself.
The colour of that phlegm that she spits in his face is so Qatari, isn't it? It's so accurate.
It's proper grim, isn't it? Proper grim. And obviously we have that moment twice where it, you know, it's spewed out at Father Karras, which apparently wasn't meant to be in his face.
No,
it was meant to be at his chest, and they went for his face. And I was like, how did they not choose to do it on his face? Like, why was that not the decision that was made? If I was making this film, I wouldn't have been able to do anything else. It wouldn't look as if anything would have looked as good. But the decision I would have made would be, right, it's going in his face.
Funnily enough, maybe he was remembering the book, because in the book it doesn't go anywhere near his face.
Yes, it goes on his jumper, on his hand as well.
That's right. Yeah,
and then usually when things are repeated, I sit back and go, well, we've seen that. We don't need to see that again. You know, but here I'm like, because it is so grim and the bile is so vivid and thick and, you know, absolutely disgusting, on Max von Sydow's face, it's just as powerful as when it happened before.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes you can't really say why these things work and why they don't work, and sometimes it's just lightning in a bottle.
Yeah.
And there are so many lightning in a bottle moments here. You know, you've got the fact that we have Linda Blair as a child actress who at no point is annoying, at no point is, you know, I always think of the Omen remake. You know, I love the original Omen, and it's going to be an episode that we're going to be covering later on. But the Omen remake, one of the biggest problems with that is the kid in it is annoying. You know, nothing against him, but he's got
the
annoying...
John Moore one, the John Moore remake with Liev Schreiber.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
He's got an annoying face, and I know he can't help it because that's his face. But he's annoying, and they give him too many lines, and he's just annoying. And usually in movies, if they've got kids in the movies, and the kids are a big part of the movie, generally speaking, I hate them because they're annoying. And there are very few movies that have kids in them where they're not annoying, and I enjoy it. You know, I'm thinking of like things like The Goonies.
Yeah.
You know, no kid in that is annoying. Even Jurassic Park, as much as I love that movie, they verge on annoying. They verge on the point of, okay, you need to sit down and be quiet now. There's a dinosaur outside.
I'm quite critical of child performances because they can be brilliant. And when they're not, I find it difficult to excuse. You know, it's why I don't like The Boy in the Striped Pajamas. I don't think the kids' performances are very good. But you look at E.T. and it's like...
Yeah. Is one of them, yeah. Yeah, as I say, it can totally ruin a movie, and it could have totally ruined this movie. You know, I think they auditioned as something like 500 kids.
Yeah,
and I'm glad they did, because if they didn't find Linda Blair or somebody of her caliber, it would have. I mean, that would have immediately. It doesn't matter how good the rest of it is. If the kid who's being possessed is annoying or is silly or is not believable. Then the rest of it falls down. Essentially, that is you know, Linda Blair is the building blocks of this film. Without her being, at the very least, not annoying, then, you know, we're not talking about this 52 years later. But
yeah, true.
You know,
I think it really did define her as well, for better or worse. Linda Blair.
She's never really been able to get away from it, has she? And, you know, in some ways, you know, that's you know, what a curse to have. You've got that body of work where it is so revered and it is so iconic.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, if you do want to go and, you know, not be the demon child and you want to do something else, it is quite difficult to.
Yeah.
You know, and perhaps a little bit of what didn't help is going back and doing The Exorcist 2. You know?
Yeah. And then, well, I mean, I think today, you know, doing a film like Repossessed, where she's in the entire thing and she thoroughly parodies the whole thing, would have been seen as perhaps a little bit of a marker of respect, but back then perhaps it didn't help either. Just confirm that was what she was going to be known for, really.
And we've just seen that shot where you see the real, you know, the true form of Pazuzu, and it's kind of, you know, it's I can't think of the technique that's used. I can't think of the word, but it's over the face of
superimposing.
And those two images on their own, you know, Pazuzu on their own is very, very scary.
Yes.
You know, Linda Blair as the demon child is very, very scary.
Yeah.
Those two together, it's like, it's about as scary as it gets in terms of, you know, visual imagery. It's very, very, very frightening. You know, I've always seen that shot of Pazuzu, which kind of comes out of nowhere. And it's always one of those things where I can't look at it for too long.
Yeah.
You know, I can't keep looking at it. I can't, has to be like I've seen it. I have to scroll on if it's on my phone or whatever it is. If it's on screen, I have to look away. It's just as I say, it just sits with you.
Yeah.
So did you know that this was based on a potentially true story? I'm saying potentially true story.
Yeah, I know it's a story that happened in Georgetown, the possession of a young boy in like 1948, and it stuck with William Peter Blatty, and he decided to fictionalize it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's, I think it was shrewd in not doing that thing that all films seem to do now, saying based on true events or based on a true story.
That's a good point, actually.
As a way of making it scarier and a way of making it like, oh, this is all true. This is all true. The way it doesn't do that is a credit to it, because that would have been a way of that, or that will make it sell more.
Yeah.
So it's to its credit that it doesn't do that, because films do that all the time. It's like, well, no, it's not based on a true story. There was somebody who had the same name, and that's about it. The Untouchables, for example, great film, but I think that's about as loosely based on a story as you could possibly get if you've listened to our episode on that. So it's very hard with this on in the background to not be totally distracted and, remembering that we are recording. And so if there are any long periods of silence, it's because we're watching the actual scene now, which,
that scene where she's knelt on the bed and that shaft of light kind of like going through her and the statue superimposed is, brilliant. The composition of this film is just
so many films don't even get one type of shot like that, and this film has several.
Many,
and the actual the room that they're filming in, which looks very, very cold, and you can see the breath of the characters. That's because it was. So they actually created a room. They actually created the room to be that cold. I think it was something like minus 30 degrees Fahrenheit, and they could only work in there for short amounts of time because the lights and everything would then heat the room up.
Yes.
And then they'd have to stop and cool it back down again. So absolute dedication to creating what we see on screen, sometimes to the point of being questionable, as we mentioned earlier with William Friedkin's practices. Guns being on the set wouldn't probably fly in today's world. Legitimately injuring your cast, again, probably wouldn't be something which you could get away with today. Definitely comes across as a bit of a maverick, William Friedkin. Those sepia tint iconic glasses of his seem to be something that are quite feared in the world of Hollywood. And as I said earlier, I would not want to get on the bad side of him.
Yeah.
So obviously we have Ellen Burstyn in the role of Chris MacNeil. One of the people who was discussed for the role, or the general impetus of somebody who should play that, was Shirley MacLaine.
Yeah, and I think she was well known to Blatty, and I think in the book, the dialogue of Chris MacNeil and mannerisms and that were kind of loosely based on her, apparently. And Burstyn does have a physical similarity to Shirley MacLaine and her, especially her bob haircut from things like The Apartment and such. Yeah, I think that would have been very interesting. Maybe she might have been too big for this role. And brilliant as Burstyn is, I mean, you could argue that perhaps her role is, she becomes more sidelined. She is often frequently hysteric and kind of helpless. So maybe quite a stereotypical mother role. I don't know if Shirley MacLaine might have not been interested in that sort of role. I mean, and you think about the content of the film, what Chris MacNeil goes through, how she's treated, that must have put a lot of people off. But yeah, it would have been interesting to see Shirley MacLaine in it for sure. I don't know if she was just a bit too, highly revered.
Yeah, I think it was that thing of
a bit too beloved.
Yeah, not that Ellen Burstyn was not well known.
No,
but I think it's that thing of sometimes when you put people with such a name behind them in the role. It's a distraction more than anything. So
I think they were talking, all the biggest stars of Hollywood at the time were talked about for Karras, but Friedkin wanted someone who was less well known.
Yeah, he did. He did.
They were talking about real priests as well, if possible. But no, they made the brilliant decision to cast Jason Miller.
One of the things, obviously, we mentioned earlier about the guns being on the set, and he would make the cast jump, to keep that, on edginess, apparent on camera. And apparently, Jason Miller wasn't particularly happy about that. And to be fair, I can see 100% why. I wouldn't be comfortable with that. And I think he questioned Friedkin on that. And Friedkin said something to the effect of, "Oh, it's all right. We've got Jack Nicholson in the next room if you need to leave." So, a little bit of power play there. But obviously we have Linda Blair as Regan McNeil. We have Jason Miller as Father Damien Karras. We have Max von Sydow as Father Lancaster Merrin. We have Lee J. Cobb as Lieutenant Kinderman.
Yeah.
We have
and 12 Angry Men, of course.
12 Angry Men.
Yeah.
Yes, he is, isn't he?
Big favourite of mine.
Yeah. We have Kitty Wynn as Sharon Spencer.
She's very good in this, in a small role, but she's really good.
Yeah. I think obviously it's difficult because it's remembering in 1973 how women were portrayed on screen, and going back to what you're saying about, Ellen Burstyn and Chris McNeil's character. That's kind of usually what you saw from women on screen in these types of roles, screaming, hollering, damsel in distress type.
Although there is a lot of that. Although I don't think that she's treated in that way by the other characters. No. I think she's treated as an equal.
Yeah, and I think that the performances of them both, Kitty Wynn and of Ellen Bernstein, adds to that, because it could have been that. It could have just been screaming, hollering all the time, and woe is me kind of element, but there is a real strength to both of their performances. We have Jack McGowan as Burke Dennings, who sadly passed away before the film was released. We have Barton Heyman as Dr. Klein. Going back to Jack McGowan, he reminds me so much of John Hurt in this. He looks to a point where, obviously, knowing that John Hurt isn't in this movie, but when I put it on the other day, I was like, no, it's not John Hurt, is it? It always reminds me of John Hurt. And obviously, this is, as we've gone through, this is critically and, by audiences revered. If we look at scores on Rotten Tomatoes, however you say it, critically it has a score of 85%. Audience score of 87%. So not often do you get critics and audiences agreeing on a movie. They're not 10 a penny. Metacritic 81 out of 100 critically, 8.5 out of 10 audience score. IMDb 8 out of 10. Really, really well revered by pretty much everybody. I don't think I've ever heard anybody say they've seen The Exorcist and they didn't like it. They may not like it because it's too much for them, or it's too scary for them, or they can't watch it because of their faith, or whatever it may be. But I don't think anybody's watched it and gone, "That is a bad movie."
No,
and if they did, I probably wouldn't value their opinion on other movies.
Yeah.
Just whilst it's just happened on screen, there's the scene where Karras flies out of the window to his death. But prior to that, he obviously takes on, the possession of Pazuzu. And it's really, really going back to influences and things that are influenced by this film. Watching it last night, the thing I got when Karras becomes possessed by Pazuzu was An American Werewolf in London.
Yeah.
A very, very similar look.
Yeah.
Very
when he snaps awake in the hospital bed from his nightmare.
Very, very similar.
Yeah.
And, you don't, you think about American Werewolf in London, which we've done an episode on, is a fantastic, if not the best werewolf movie ever made. Things like what I was saying earlier about Halloween, widely regarded as one of the best slashers ever made. you don't get those masterpieces in their own right without this film, or at least it takes longer to get there, or it's not quite as revered. So this film really is the standard bearer for not just horror films, but films in general. You know, I think even, as I was saying earlier, people who don't like horror films usually still hold this in high regard.
That's right.
Because ultimately, I think on the face of it, it is a horror movie, but it isn't a horror movie. It's a film about faith, and I think warts and all films.
I think that's the misunderstanding of people who haven't or won't watch it. I think people of faith who haven't watched it have probably been told by the powers that be that they can't watch it, just like they can't watch Life of Brian or they can't watch Last Temptation. And that's a shame, and that's very counterproductive. But I think there's, especially nowadays with the proliferation of films like this, The Conjuring this, Insidious that, The Exorcism of this, The Exorcism of that, I think that the whole franchise or the whole kind of subgenre, possession movies, you know, people who won't watch it think that it's just it's offensive or it's cheapening faith or cheapening God or whatever. And I think that's probably why people I know who won't watch it, because they think it's just another film that is taking something that's very dear to them and turning it into a sideshow.
Yeah, but making a mockery of it.
Although that is exactly what the filmmakers did not want to do. That, and or they know about the film's content, and it is shocking stuff. It really, really is, for any era, and it doesn't shy away from it. And that's paradoxical as well, because of course there's much worse stuff in the Bible and, you know, that sort of stuff. So it's a shame. I think it should be at the top of the list for people who have faith or are having a crisis of faith, because, you know, this is as real as it gets for fiction. You know, the aesthetic, the verisimilitude of the film. You know, the film is a debate, the film is a discussion, and the film is as real as it can get for fiction, I think.
And I think we can all relate to something in this movie. Obviously, I'm not saying everybody's experience of possessions or things like that, but we can all relate to that general feeling of questioning why, you know, questioning, you know, your belief system, or questioning, maybe not in a religious sense, but just questioning, you know, what is going on? I thought I knew where my life was heading, what my life plan was, but maybe I don't know that. You know, we can all get that sense. And I think for me, that's why the poignancy of that final scene is so powerful, because we now see Father Dyer questioning everything he's just experienced.
Yeah.
And, you know, the fact that he walks down this, you know, this street and then he turns back. It's so open to interpretation. You know, is he turning his back on his faith, or is he returning back to his faith? You know, you can
going back to the parish, perhaps.
Yeah, you can take it either way. So, in terms of further watching, then, so if you like this movie, what other movies might you like? What have you thought?
I would say anything by Scott Derrickson, because he's a filmmaker of faith, or at the very least, a lot of knowledge and experience with religion and faith. He did not have the best upbringing, and he's thankfully gone in his own direction and been able to escape from that sort of thing. But yeah, things like Black Phone and The Devil Within Us, as we said earlier, and also he did The Exorcism of Emily Rose. And I didn't realize this, but apparently one of the very early ideas for The Exorcist was that it would be a courtroom thriller, looking back at the events. And you can see how, with a bit of tweaking, this could have easily been that sort of film. And The Exorcism of Emily Rose got some really, really fascinating courtroom stuff in it, where looking at this sort of thing and to what extent it's true and that sort of stuff. And again, a film that treats it seriously. It's not another, there's nothing wrong with these Insidious films and that sort of stuff. But, when there's something a little bit more to Scott Derrickson's movies, I'd say. I really like Signs as well. M. Night Shyamalan's film, because that's overtly about faith, and that's a decent scary movie. It's like a gateway horror movie. It's a 12 rated film. I've got a film club at school where I teach, and that's a mainstay, that film. And a lot of people really, I mean, I know there's some plot holes to say the least, and the twist at the end and that sort of stuff. And, you know, aliens being fatally allergic to water on a planet that's basically water is interesting. But
strikes me at like 2 o'clock in the morning. I need to go to bed. I'll just do. They're just allergic to water.
Yeah, even though something like orange juice or Dr. Pepper would be a bit more reasonable. Yeah. You know, if you're leaving Dr. Pepper all over the house, that would have made sense. Yeah,
something that isn't pretty much in the atmosphere, pretty much 24/7.
Yeah, you know, other things by, you know, Friedkin. I mean, have a look at The French Connection, but also have a look at The Sorcerer, which has become very, very revered and reappraised. It was a complete flop at the time. But that's another film which has got very ominous first hour, a lot of realism, but a very ominous sense of these characters being carefully drawn together for something bigger. And that's showing at the Connaught, by the way, very soon. Have you seen it?
I haven't seen it, no.
Man,
but I know,
so lucky
I know
you get to see it in the cinema for the first time.
Had such a really difficult filming of it. It was really sort of like...
go and see it if you can. Yeah, that's getting a proper decent 4K release as well and all that sort of stuff.
So it's interesting you say about Exorcism of Emily Rose, because I saw The Exorcism of Emily Rose before I saw The Exorcist.
Have you got it?
I haven't. No. And I will be getting it after this discussion and after watching this. Because, that was a movie that I remember it not being like all of the other poor knockoff exorcism type films.
Exactly.
Whereby it felt very much like when I was reading the book of The Exorcist. It's a detective thing, and it's in a courtroom and you're questioning, well, did this really happen? Is this something spiritual, or is it something psychological? What's the situation? And that's really well done. It has a great performance from, I can't remember her name, but she plays, what's his name in Dexter? Can't think of her name. It's going to really annoy me. So
Carpenter? Someone Carpenter?
I think that.
Yeah, must be her.
Jennifer Carpenter.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, who plays Deborah in Dexter. She's great in that. And I think much like The Exorcist, a lot of the effects in terms of the possession are done by the actors. So the voice of, which we didn't really speak about, the voice of Pazuzu is, there's very little sort of like trickery there. It's very much just the voice of, and I've totally missed her name.
Frances McCambridge or something like that?
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's all done, and I think a lot of the other than, I think, you know, the contact lenses and the black eyes in Exorcism of Emily Rose, but the contortion and the actual conflict of the face is very much Jennifer Carpenter. She's adding a lot to that role, and I didn't realise that was Scott Derrickson either. It was a long time since I watched that film. Yeah. So
the other things I'd say, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, purely because that came out in the late 90s. That was a good time, the kind of 90s, for the final official re-release of banned films. Yeah. So out came Evil Dead, out came Clockwork Orange, and The Exorcist and Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Those are the big four, and they all got releases in the cinema. So that's kind of interesting. And again, a very kind of realistic, well, hyper-realistic, but because of budget, it couldn't avoid being quite realistic, almost naturalistic, that film, in the way it's shot. Is it Hail Mary as well? The Rose Glass movie? Something Mary.
Bloody Mary?
Let me have a look. But that's about, sorry, let me remind myself. Saint Hail Mary, what am I talking about? Saint Maud.
Oh, yeah. Saint Maud. I haven't seen that, but
Saint Maud is incredible. Another film, it's a bit more pessimistic than the Exorcist, but another film that treats this sort of thing very, very seriously and is terrifying, and it's got an all-timer of an ending as well. I saw it in the Dome, I think, and it's three of us, and one person didn't like it, but me and the other guy we just looked at each other, just dumbfounded and baffled and exhilarated. That's a great film. She went on to direct Love Lies Bleeding with Kristen Stewart. And the final one I'd say is Devil. Did you ever see that?
Yes.
The one in the lift.
Yeah, in the lift. That's a really good one, yeah.
I think it's a story or at least something to do with M. Night Shyamalan. And again...
He's in it, I think.
Is he?
I think he's in it. He has a cameo. I think he's one of the guys who gets in the lift briefly.
But ultimately, again, treats it seriously, but there's more to it. It's ultimately about forgiveness and regaining kind of those faith sort of elements in that.
And that's quite a short movie as well, so it is one you can just stick on, and
Yeah.
it's done in about an hour and 20, hour and 30.
Mm-hmm.
So ones that I would mention, The Omen, I think is, you know, another... for me, it's like the British version of The Exorcist. It's that, you know, that British iconic horror from the 70s.
Do you know what I really like almost as much as The Omen? The Omen 2.
I think The Omen 2's quite underrated, actually.
I think it's really underrated.
I watched it back the other day,
it's
and
great.
it's quite underrated.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Bury Our Bones with Cinema. We really appreciate you joining us as we deep dive into the world of film. Be sure to follow us on all of our social media pages to stay informed. You can find us on YouTube, TikTok and Instagram at Bury Our Bones with Cinema. You've been listening to Jimmy Murphy, Gaz Evans and Ryan Etherington. We will see you next time for more cinematic discussions and hidden treasures. Until then, don't forget to keep your bones buried in the world of cinema. And it will be a one-button job. Boom, 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 toom, toom, toom.
I have a terrible tendency to just scroll about but you're talking when we're doing it. I still find it slightly distracting.
It's a bit weird, but I think it's a bit weird. But I suppose
maybe if you listen to it back, see if it sounds. I was like, I'm gonna have to stop it because you're listening back.
Good job I observed that well, wasn't it?